Okay, so this presentation is for the conditioning and learning readings. I'm going to break this into two sections. First, classical conditioning, and then instrumental conditioning. So this one is just the first part. So first, I want you to think about something that causes you to startle or fear, or feel fear, even though others don't usually have that reaction. So maybe there's something that you're particularly afraid of that not everybody else is. Um, or what about a certain smell that creates a sick feeling for you, but not for most? So do you know what led to that reaction? For some people, the sick one is food that you ate and then you got sick. And so whenever you smell that food now, you start to feel nauseous. Um, so just think about something that might be for you. And then another option is, can you think of something that used to cause a reaction like that, but no longer does? So we're going to learn about some of those kinds of things today, or how that happens for you. So we're going to distinguish between classical and instrumental conditioning. We are going to explain how they work separately and together to influence our behavior. And we're going to name the 4 aspects of observational learning and give examples. So this slideshow is going to be a little bit about those definitions and then focus on classical conditioning. The next video does the other things. So first, a couple definitions. We'll use the word condition or conditioning. Usually we think of the word condition as maybe a situation, or other people think of conditioner, like make things a little smoother. So what we want to think about is conditioning is when it's kind of like training, but we use the word condition because it is learning under particular situations. And then when we talk about stimulus, what we mean is something that stimulates a response. So, for example, something comes close to your eye and then you blink. The stimulus is the something coming close to your eye. The reaction is the blink. Okay? Reflex or instinctive response is that eye blink. So, two different kinds of responses. One is that instinct or natural response versus another kind of response, which is a voluntary or purposeful response. So somebody asks me to blink and I blink, that blinking is voluntary, okay, or purposeful. So the difference between those two is important going forward. So when we're talking about these two different kinds of conditioning, we have an involuntary response, which is natural instinct, which is involved in classical conditioning. Operant or instrumental conditioning is related to voluntary responses. So we are acting on our environment in a purposeful way. So again, involuntary is classical, voluntary is operant. This acronym VOICE is one way to remember that. Voluntary is operant, involuntary is classical. Easy. So Ivan Pavlov is one of our famous psychologists, or not, I don't even think, he wasn't a psychologist, he was like a physiologist. But he is a person we learn about in psychology class because he is the one who studied the salivating dogs. So if you've heard of Pavlov's dogs, this is who we're talking about here. Now, why are we talking about dogs in psychology? Well, he learned about this thing called conditioning while he was studying the digestion of dogs. So he discovered that when he was measuring how much saliva they were producing, things like that. And what he realized was that when he presented food, to the dog, and then the dog salivated, and he was studying some of this stuff and how digestion begins even before food is taken in. And what he realized was that when he was walking down the hallway and turning on the lights, the dog started salivating. He knew this because he was measuring saliva all the time, and he would come in and there'd be saliva there and not even any food. Okay, so when he noticed these things, he started to play around and to figure out what was causing this or to come up with some theories. So with the food, food is a natural, instinctive, salivation to food is an unconditioned reflex. It's a reflex that's natural and something we don't have to learn, okay? Food is presented and we salivate in dogs and in people, right? That is unconditioned, which means unlearned, or, doesn't have to be any particular situation. It happens pretty much all the time, okay? Then we have a neutral stimulus. So in this case, a buzzer. And when you put off a buzzer, there's no salivation. That's not a normal response to a buzzer, right? But what happens is if you pair the buzzer with the food, so at the same time you present the food, you present the buzzer, or do the buzzer first and then the food, what happens is the dog begins to salivate to the buzzer. Okay, so that was the same as the walking down the hall and turning on the lights, and then the food started to salivate even before the food was presented. So that was a learned reflex. Okay, so now when you present the buzzer alone, the dog salivates, which is now considered a conditioned response. The conditioned stimulus is the same thing as the unconditioned stimulus, but the conditioned response the conditioned stimulus is something different than the unconditioned stimulus. Okay, the unconditioned stimulus was the food, the conditioned stimulus is the buzzer. The dog salivating is the same response, but we're now calling it the conditioned response. So the unconditioned response, or UCS, leads to salivation, which is the UCR. Conditioned response is the buzzer, or conditioned stimulus is the buzzer, leads to the same response, which is now called the conditioned response. It's a learned response to that buzzer. So what happens if we keep buzzing the buzzer and not giving food? Eventually, the dog will stop salivating. Just as you stop getting rewarded for something or stop getting a paycheck, you stop doing the thing, right? Okay. So the dog stopped, not that the dog was voluntarily salivating, but that's that instinct that was trained and it no longer does it anymore, okay? So here's an example in real life. You eat the new food and you get sick because of a stomach bug. So then you develop a strong dislike for that food and feel nauseated whenever you smell it. So you now have associated, even if you didn't do it consciously, your body has been conditioned to have a dislike for that food and to feel nauseated whenever you smell it. Okay, so the unconditioned stomach is the stomach bug, which causes nausea. So that's normal. You have a stomach bug, you get sick or you feel sick, right? You paired a new food with that unconditioned stimulus of the stomach bug, and now you respond to that new food in the same way you responded to the stomach bug. So nausea has now been conditioned to that new food.